What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. WWLA, Wild West Los Angeles, the American Race Series, and it is Black History Month. So February, as we all know, this is the time of the year where we are normally reminded by our Black scholars and the media outlets about the transatlantic slave trade, the civil rights movement, Pan-Africanism, freedom fighters. This is normally what we hear around this time of the year. But I wanted to bring some new information to the table, some information that most of us probably never heard before. And that information is regarding this guy. So this is Saturiona. Saturiona is an American king, amongst others, that lived in the 1500s. So currently the story starts in 1619. We've all heard of, like the 1619 Project by Oprah Winfrey, where this marks the beginning of the history for Blacks in the United States. So why does the story start here? Why 1619? We're going to have to kind of dig ourselves out of this hole to kind of get an understanding of things. And the way we have to do that is to understand race. So what is race? Currently, we look at race in the United States as black, white, blah, 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 blah. But when you leave the boundaries of the United States, the territory of the USA, and travel into other countries, people no longer utilize terminologies like black and white or yellow or things of that nature. People in other countries utilize their nationalities. So, what are white people? Are white people white? Should we refer to them as white people? Or should we refer to them by what they are? And that's European. What is a European? A European is Scottish, Dutch, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, German, Polish, Irish, English, French. These are Europeans. So it gets difficult to understand history when we generalize different nations under an umbrella term such as white. So when we think of our history and we think our encounters with these white people, we are not realizing that we are not identifying the geographical location in which these white people came from. What nations did they come from? So why does the story start in 1619? Is this white history? It's not white history. Can't be white history. Whose history is it? It's English history. So 1619, the English chose to start their narrative in the New World in 1619 for us. So how do we get to Saturiona's history? How do we find out about this? Who do we have to research in order to find out information on this guy? We can look to the French. The French arrived in the Americas before the English. So 1619, if we go back to 1562, that's 57 years before 1619. 57 years before 1619. 57 years, only 57 years before 1619. That takes us back to the French arriving in what we know today as Florida. The domain of the powerful king Saturiona. So, how do we go deeper into that? How we can't just say, oh, the French, we know the French, so we know that Saturiona existed. How do we research this? We can look to Jacques Lemoyne, Theodore de Bry, Jean Ribault, René de Lanière. These are Frenchmen, well, except Theodore de Bry. Theodore de Bry is actually Dutch. Jean Ribault, René de Lanière, Jacques Lemoyne. These are Frenchmen that came in 1562 through 1565 to the landmass of Florida and recorded written and visual testimonies. How do we not know that? How do we not know that Jean Ribault and René de Lanière came to Florida in the 1560s and encountered King Saturiona, which doesn't look like a Native American, doesn't look like the Hollywood depiction of a Native American. So who's Jean Ribault? Jean Ribault, born in 1520 in France, died in 1565 in Florida. He's a French naval officer. His mission was to seek refuge in the New World and set up a colony for the French Protestants, known as Huguenots. These are people that are running from religious persecution by the Catholic Church. Critical to understand. Doesn't involve white domination, doesn't involve black enslavement. These are people running from religious persecution in Europe, happening in Europe at this time. René de Lanière was a merchant mariner, a Frenchman, also accompanied Jean Ribault. These two men left written accounts as to what they experienced in Florida, who they saw, the customs, the rituals, the belief system, the advanced agricultural systems, the Mound works. So to circle back to race, what is race? What is an American? What's an African? We know what European is. We know that European is French, Irish, Dutch, Polish, Italian, Sicilian, Spanish, English. We know that these are Europeans. So the human family breaks down into 4 groups. Homo sapiens sapien breaks down into 4 groups. The Americas, Africa, Asia, and Europe. Europe, Europeans, French, Irish, Spanish, Dutch. Asia, Chinese, Korean, Taiwan, Mongolian, Siberian, African, Angolian, Somalian, Eritrean, Ethiopian, Nigerian, Congolese. And when it gets to American, American is anyone that resides in the territories of the United States. How is that? How is it that anyone can come and be a citizen of the United States and utilize the term American? All other nations have a blood connection, blood lineage But American is just a brand name currently for the United States. So what did American mean prior to European involvement? Let's look that up. American, 1828, definition. So the term American in 1828, this is actually with European involvement. The term American at this particular time originally applied to the Aboriginals found here by Europeans, but now apply to the descendants of Europeans and everyone that lives and is a citizen of the United States. So before this, what this is saying is that the term American was applied to the Aboriginals. So in 1562, the Aboriginals looked like this. Feather crown. If you know American iconography, the feathered crown is very important. Feathered crown symbolizes the Americas, the empire of the Americas. So that's what we're trying to get to the bottom of, this whole race thing. Black, white. Is it about black and white, or is it about nationality? How do we know that that is Saturiona? How do we know that this is a Florida king? Besides the fact that René de Lanière and Jean Roubaud spoke about it or wrote about it. How do we know? Jacques Lemoyne, who lived in the 1500s as well, and accompanied René de Lanière and Jean Roubaud on their expedition to Florida. His purpose on the mission was to record everything that he saw. He was the cartographer, he was the engraver, the person that was supposed to record the botanicals, the people, the customs, the rituals, the manner in which the American lived. This is the job description of Jacques Lemoyne. Jacques Lemoyne's illustrations are of vital historical importance. They are the first eyewitness testimony by a European of the American peoples. Let's think about that. So his works are the first European visual testimony. Who's Theodore de Bry, the Dutchman that I mentioned? 3 years after Jacques Lemoyne's death, Theodore de Bry recreated Jacques Lemoyne's original engravings. Let's take a look at this book right here. So, Discovering the New World. So, based on the works of Theodore de Bry, edited by Michael Alexander, first U.S. edition, Library of Congress, catalog card number 74-25021. So let's look at the depictions of Saturiona, because Theodore de Bry revised, this is Theodore de Bry's revised version of Jacques Lemoyne's original engravings. So, as the story goes, historians will all agree that we don't know where Jacques Lemoyne's original engravings are. I don't know, maybe they're somewhere in someone's private library somewhere. We don't know where they are. They're supposedly vanished, gone. Theodore de Bry revised Jacques Lemoyne's engravings. What historians also agree is that we don't know where Jacques Lemoyne's hand ended and where Theodore de Bry's hand began, meaning we don't know what Theodore de Bry changed. What did he alter? Okay. Theodore de Bry. Dutchman right here. So let's see how they depicted the Americans at the time. So we can see that these are the illustrations that you can see in any prestigious museum, any prestigious university library is going to have these colonial archives. This is Saturiona leading a war party before heading to war. This is how we see Saturiona. Tattoos and everything. What you can see is that all these people are pale skin, or, since there's no color in this photo, the original engravings were watercolor, but we can find pale versions of Theodore de Bry's works in all of the prestigious housing locations, universities, libraries, the Library of Congress, the museums. Even though historians recognize that these versions of Jacques Lemoyne's engravings may have been altered, they still display them as if they are the originals. So that's weird. That's weird that they do that. Is it weird, or is it by design? But what's interesting is that, how do we make the connection to the statue that I was showing? How do we say that the statue on the book that I showed in the beginning is Saturiona? All right, let me show you how to do that. So this is Saturiona. In Theodore de Bry's engravings, it also shows Saturiona leading a war party. Let's show you one more of Saturiona. So here we have another very, very, very important historical document here. This is Saturiona. Well, it says Saturiona left. When King Saturiona left for war, his soldiers advanced in no particular order, scattered on all sides. On the other hand, his enemy, Atina, another American king, super powerful, that we never heard about. Okay? Atina, King Saturiona. We're going to get to Atina later, but let's focus on Saturiona right now. How do we know that this dark-skinned figure is the same person that they're talking about? The Met Museum. Let's pull up the Met Museum's write-up on this sculpture here. Let's pull this up. So if you go on your Google search right now and you type in the Moor with Emerald Cluster, this statue will come up in the search results. Why do they call it the Moor? Why don't they say Saturiona? The Moor, in this case, is utilized to describe his complexion. So as we know, Moor can either mean one of two things. It can mean the Islamic person, or it can mean a dark-skinned person, a Moor, a black Moor. In this case, they chose to denationalize him in the title. The Moor with the Emerald Cluster, the black person with the Emerald Cluster. Not Saturiona, the American king with the Emerald Cluster. They're not saying that. But when you go into the article by Helmut Nickel, curator of arms and armor at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, you can pull this up on your Google search. Moor with the Emerald Cluster. You will find a write-up by the Metropolitan Museum. What does it say? What does it say in the write-up? The Moor is represented as a muscular youth in swaggering stride. He is carved from pear wood and lacquered a deep brown. His broadly smiling face with its wide, blunt nose and full lips is clearly meant to be that of a negro, not Negro. So not Negro, negro, Spanish for black. His blunt nose and full lips is clearly meant to be that of a negro. But his curly hair is, when seen from the front, almost entirely hidden by a jeweled gold feather crown of a type generally associated with the romantic images of American Indians. This guy. This is who we're talking about. If you just tapping in right now, this is who we're talking about right here. Saturiona. The Moor's dark brown skin is covered on arms, legs, and body with intricate tattoos meticulously produced by thousands of tiny dots of blue, black lacquer paint. Okay? What else does it say about this American king? What can they tell us more about him being an American? How do we know this is Saturiona? We still don't know this is Saturiona. They're calling him a Moor so far. It's important to mention that he's holding these emeralds here. The best emeralds in the world come from the Americas. They come from Mound in Colombia. These emeralds are thought to be from Mound, Colombia. Okay? So he's holding American emeralds. Keep that in mind. How do we know these are from Mound? How do we know these emeralds are from Mound? So it says the Moor carries a tray of tortoiseshell containing a matrix of emeralds. This was presented to Elector Augustus, 1553 to 1886, the founder of Dresden, the Dresden State Art Collections. It was presented to him by his friend Emperor Rudolph II in 1581. So The emeralds were presented to him in 1581. What do we know more about the emeralds? How do we know that these are from Muzo? When Augustus paid him a visit in Prague, how do they pronounce that? Prague. Soon after Rudolph's recovery from a serious illness, the emeralds were kept in a black box lined with crimson velvet and were cataloged under the section Precious Stones, Unicorn, and Rhinoceros Horns. They were said to have come from the Indies of the West, probably Muzo in Colombia, and had presumably been sent to Europe by some Spanish conquistador. So in 1581, these emeralds arrived to Elector Augustus. In 1581, just the emeralds. The Moor with the emerald cluster must have been created shortly before 1725. So in 1725, this was created, the figure. Why did they create the figure? Let's read a little bit more. So, by the order of Augustus the Strong, that this great connoisseur with his surpassing sense for the dramatic must have decided that a worthy setting was needed for the prized emeralds. A noble savage offering the old world, meaning Europe, the astounding riches of the new, meaning the Americas. So, this is a representation of a noble savage offering to the old world the astounding riches of the new. So we know that he's noble. How do we know he's Saturiona? This powerful king, how do we know? So, when we read a little bit more in the article, this is where it comes out. Crazy information. I don't know how this is not all over everyone's television, media. How are the black scholars not talking about this? How is this not in school books? How is this not being discussed at the HBCUs? How? So we're going to find out what it says to let us know that this is Saturiona, the king of Florida. Among de Bry's illustrations to René de Laudernier's report about the abortive French settlement in Florida in 1564, we find the exact model for the Moors' tattoos in those of the powerful king called Saturiona, figure 9. Let me show y'all what photo, or what image is figure 9. This is the image that they're showing in figure 9. And they're saying that the statue that I'm saying, or they're saying, is Saturiona, the black Moor, the Moor with the emerald cluster, is Saturiona based off of the tattoos that the statue has. So the tattoos are the exact same on the statue as they are in figure 9 of Saturiona leading this war party. So we get this description of Saturiona by Theodore de Bry. But Augustus the Strong in 1724, sometime after, that's not a small period of time. So 1562, Saturiona lived. 1724, Augustus the Strong created this sculpture based off the original engravings by Jacques Lemoyne. This has to be the reason why Jacques Lemoyne's original engravings are no longer around or somewhere hid in someone's private library, private collection. It has to be the reason why. Because Augustus the Strong wasn't just some rinky-dink sculptor. He wasn't just some guy in the rural area just making sculptures such as this. Augustus the Strong was a powerful man in his territory that commissioned the best sculptors, Balthazar Permoser, and jewelers of that time in Europe, commissioned them to create this piece to be the centerpiece of his entire collection. So, how are we not knowledgeable of this history? How do we not have this in our history books? Where are the black scholars at? So we have to get away from black. We have to get away from African. We have to get away from all of these terminologies that lead us away from who we are. So for the history that was told to us by the English about the Native American, we have been made confused to think that we're mixed with the Native American. Many of us have family members, grandmothers, great grandmothers, aunties, great aunties, uncles that may have told us, may have told you that you have Indian in your blood. Cherokee, Choctaw, Blackfoot, Shinnecock. Who are the Indians that our family members were talking about? Because the Native American that we learn about in the Hollywood films and, the history books that are in public schools, we learn that the Native American is someone totally different than this. And we try to connect ourselves with them. We try to say, oh, we must be mixed with them. Or was we just this? We're not mixed at all. We're just American. Maybe that's the case. What is an American? Is an American someone that just comes to the United States and lives here and works here and now they can be an American? Or do you have to have a blood connection to this? So now that we know that this is Saturiona and this is an American king, how does this change the story? Because this is only 57 years before 1619. This is the American Race Series. This is where we're here to learn about how to discuss race in the manner that it should be discussed. When we learn about the Native American, we think that the Native American is the group that was here, that was before a European arrival, before African arrival. We think that the Native American is who occupied the land in total. But when you look into the research, you look into the data, you look into the information, we find that the Native American is not actually American. The Native American is actually Siberian and Mongolian, Russian, the Eskimo, That's the Native American. But that's not the mound builders. See, this is the mound builder culture. This is the Mississippian culture. The dominant culture. This is not teepees. This has nothing to do with nomadic behavior, nomadic peoples. These are people that are controlling the mainland of North America. From the Great Lakes region down to the Gulf of Mexico, there exists a mound builder culture that we're not talked about. The Timucua are Saturiona's people. But when you read about the Timucua, they say that these people are extinct. Are they extinct? On paper. When you change your name, your classification so many times, you go extinct. So we go from being American down to Negro, down to Black, down to African American, and now Saturiona is gone. You'll never know. You'll never ever hear about that because you don't even connect yourself with this. It's interesting because the Native American, when you do the knowledge on the Mississippian culture and you do the knowledge on the Aztecs and the Mayans, there's no separation. There's no break in culture. It's the exact same culture. But when you look at the Native Americans are this nomadic people. And then the modern day Mexican Hispanic is now claiming the history of the Aztecs and the Mayans. Two totally different people claiming one whole history. We're going to get into Incas, Mayans, and Georgia and all that stuff a little bit later. But starting here with Saturiona, I think this is where we are going to begin everything. Because really it starts in 1492 with the fall of the Moors in Spain. That gave way to Europeans being able to find new trade routes and new sources of rich minerals and stones and metals and botanicals in the New World. So in 1492, 1562, this was happening in the Americas. A couple books that also verify this. The Conquest of Florida. Theodore Irving. Hernando de Soto. What year is that? You see the year? (1869). This book talks about the conquest of Florida, Spanish. Pioneers of France in the New World. These are primary sources that you want to read. You want to get away from reading people's opinions. So, and reading people's philosophies. So people that are Afrocentric, authors that are, emotionally attached to blackness or Africanism. You don't want to dive into those books. You want to go straight to the source. The Spanish settlements, Florida, 1562, 1574, Volume 2. Lowry, Lanier, and Fort Caroline. You want to know about Fort Caroline when dealing with Saturiona. You want to know about St. Augustine when you're dealing with Saturiona. We're going to dig into this history. So when we're dealing with this history, you have to know that this is not white history. The people that we refer to as white, they're actually broken down into different nations with different customs, different belief systems, different geographical locations. So we have to know who came to the new world. For them, it's the new world. The Americas is the old world. But for them, this is the first time experiencing this world that they've all heard rumors about. Rumors of roads paved in gold. English, French, Spanish. English came late. The French came second. The Spanish came first. So to get a better understanding of the story that they want us to believe, 1619, we need to go to 1562, before the English got here. And that's with the French. We'll get to the Spanish. We'll go back in time and get to the Spanish, and we'll find out what exactly and who they were dealing with. But for right now, we're going to dig more into Saturiona and the vast empire that he ruled over. We're talking gold mines, silver mines, copper mines. We're talking an abundance of pearls and botanicals, advanced agricultural systems, irrigation, plaza cities, mound cities, organized militaries, sun worshippers. It's said that a lot of Athena and Saturiona, they made no decisions without their sorcerers. So you have American kings dealing with sun worship and, in a sense, witchcraft. This has nothing to do with anything African. This is not Mansa Musa. This is not the Islamic Moorish Empire. This is not King Tut. This is not Hannibal. This is purely American. Something that we didn't know. A big part of history that we did not know. They did not tell us that there were, in the 1500s, great powerful kings, dripping in gold, dark skin, in the Americas, building pyramids and mound structures. The most advanced civilization in the world at the time, in the 1500s, was here in the Americas, dealing with Saturiona and those that came before him. And even in 1619, there were other powerful kings that the English were dealing with in the Massachusetts area. This is an introduction into the history of Saturiona and how we will approach his story. So be sure to tap in into the next video where we will go deeper into the relationships that were built with Jean Ribault, René de Launière, and Saturiona. So we'll dive into the primaries to find out what was all going on. What was the relationships? What's the power structure? Who was in charge? What beefs were made? It's going to get real interesting because the Spanish and the French are not friends. This is why we can't call them white, because they don't even look at themselves as white. They look at themselves by their nation. So the story goes, the French were enemies of the Spanish. The French were friends with Saturiona. Saturiona was the diabolical enemy of the Spanish. This guy. The greatest enemy of the Spanish. The Spanish and the French are fighting in Florida. Saturiona is fighting his enemies that are also Americans. Atina, another king said to be even more powerful than Saturiona, was friends with the Spanish. The Spanish clicked up with Atina. Saturiona wanted to click up with the French. He wanted to absorb them into his empire, into his military structure. And he wanted to utilize the French to go to war with his American enemies, Atina. Interesting story. No movies have been made on this. Nothing in Hollywood talks about this story, which is documented in these primary sources here. These are all cataloged in the Library of Congress. Primaries. So we're not dealing with Ashra Kwesi. We're not dealing with Sheikh Anta Diop. We're not dealing with Dr. Ben. We're not dealing with the Afrocentric philosophy. We're not dealing with Pan-Africanism. This is not Pan-Africanism. This is not Moorish history. These are not Muslims. So we're going to go more into this history, Saturiona, which will hopefully help you build a personal relationship with an American king like you have with the kings of Africa. This connects us with the landmass that our grandparents came from, our great-great-grandparents came from, our great-great-great-grandparents came from. This is the history that has been omitted, that we will reveal on this channel. So, I see you guys on the next one.